the way that technology performs is really dependent upon what are the inputs. And who actually is inputting is just as important of how it actually works and functions.
There's plenty of examples of bias in algorithms that can have severe repercussions on Black people's access to healthcare, financial services, education, much more. I'm wondering, as AI and algorithms become more frequently adopted by the ad industry, how can businesses identify and reduce bias in their algorithms to avoid perpetuating discrimination?
I think the most obvious thing is to get Black and brown kids into STEM. But obviously that will take some time. What are some of the things we could do now? The first thing, in advertising, there's a lot of diversity, but what we're not seeing still is a lot of inclusion. I challenge you to name how many Black CTOs are in the advertising space in New York City. I probably know 5. The people who are the decision makers in terms of what campaigns get funded, what ideas get pushed through and built for the client. When you're talking a major corporation, who's got a media spend of like, $100 million for the year, based on my experience, the gatekeepers are typically middle-aged white people. It's not a matter of how many of us there are in terms of Black people working in agencies. It's, well, how many of us are actually in leadership positions, right?
The best way that we can actually adjust it and actually try to remove, or let's say manage bias, if you will, it's very hard to completely annihilate bias in anything, is by having certain stakeholders at the table at different touch points during the production or creation of any type of AI technology or computer programming. I think one of the most important pieces, unfortunately, is that it does require a human assessment of how can the technology be positive, but also how can it be negative, or how can it have an impact inadvertently to a certain group or demographic inside of the society.
I actually think that in order for us to see real change when it comes to AI and bias in these systems, I don't think the private sector alone can do it. I think there has to be some policies that are written from Washington to hold these big tech companies accountable.
Brands and publishers with a diversity focus can often face issues advertising because of blunt advertising policies that fail to understand nuance. An example that was shared with me recently was that Ebony Media would find itself constantly battling exclusion lists because the term ebony was associated with porn. It seems the only way to get around this is to have more diverse people writing policies and governing technology. Have you seen much progress on that front?
I have to say I have in the past few years in tech overall. Technology has been democratized, right? Which is great. You look at, say, 15 years ago, the type of people that were getting computer science degrees and were entering this space, white males, right? Predominantly. There was a stat I read recently that said millennials are the one generation where women are more educated than men. I could totally believe that, right? Because I see a lot of women now that are earning advanced degrees. I see also a lot of Black women that are taking on entrepreneurial roles. You look at folks like Angel Rich. She created like an app that's valued now a couple $1 billion. She's been quoted as the next Steve Jobs. But I do still see a lot of barriers. I think now it's time for us to start looking at certain verticals. DevOps, for instance. You look at AI and machine learning and that whole space, right? You typically need a degree, a really advanced degree, to get into that space. It's time for us to make that easier to get into.
I've seen some progress. I mean, I will tell you, I just attended a couple months back the Brand Safety Summit, and that was one of the number one points discussed is the negative implications of exclusion lists. In my own vernacular, day to day, and if you work with me, you'd hear I would say, that's dope. When I'm complimenting colleagues, or I'm complimenting something that's been done or accomplished. Needless to say, I guarantee you the word dope is on a significant amount of ad agencies' list for exclusion. In our vernacular, every single day, there are tons of words that are like that. And I think it's important to just scrub that list by having someone at the table who is aware and conscious that maybe that word doesn't mean what they think it means, I think it comes from always being conscious and always being aware that 40% of the United States is actually qualified as multicultural today.
Black people that grew up on Ebony magazine, fabulous publication, by the way, we know that, you know what, that's actually a part of who we are as Black people. And the stories are rich and they're motivating. We've got to now start shifting that upstream and start letting the folks that are, coding this stuff know that, hey, by the way, you should put a filter in there when you see the word ebony. You've got to look at the context.